Butterfly Kisses opens with an immensely alluring hook. In 2004, a film student called Sophia Korean leaves behind a video requesting the finder to finish her thesis film by bookending it with her final interview, in which she claims her death is imminent the moment she blinks. Behind her are cryptic drawings, markings, and a towering, shadowy figure she alludes to as Peeping Tom, an urban legend who is said to appear before anyone who stares down the tunnel of the Ilchester Maryland Railway line after midnight for 1 full hour without blinking. If successful, the myth goes that each time the person subsequently blinks, Peeping Tom, or Mr. Blink, or Blinkman, or Ilchester the Molester, as the residents call him, will appear closer and closer before one day finally killing them. Think of it as the Weeping Angels meets Bloody Mary meets Slenderman dressed as the Babadook, and you sort of get the idea. Over 11 years later, the tapes are discovered by Gavin York, a struggling wedding videographer who sees it as an opportunity to finally kickstart his grander filmmaking ambitions by documenting his journey to piece together the unfinished film. However, before long, the alleged found footage is quickly called into question by multiple experts and critics who point out the evident cliches, camera tricks, and filmmaking tropes common to the genre that paint either Gavin or Sophia and her partner Feldman as likely fraudsters to an elaborate and well-executed hoax. Brilliantly written, directed, and technically starring the late Eric Christopher Myers, Butterfly Kisses was conceived in his words as a deconstruction of the found footage genre and the real-world horror of being an artist. At its heart, it's a film about obsession and desperation that, I'll admit, did not fully work with me the first time round, but on subsequent rewatches, it's a richly layered exploration of countless themes, from artistic aspirations to the morals of documentary film, to the desire to be believed and recognized at the cost of your own sanity. It doesn't just deal with one thing, perhaps it bites off more than it can chew, seeing as it was initially a 3-hour edit cut down to 90 minutes, which leaves a tremendous amount of information to compress into what is still a legitimately frightening film. Now, before we dive any deeper, I want to thank this video's sponsor Raycon for making horror content like this possible. By now, I imagine most of you have heard of Raycon, as over the last 6 years, they've made a name for themselves in the premium audio space with high quality audio and functionality at half the price of other premium brands. To celebrate their 6th birthday and recent expansions into Raycon Home and Raycon PowerTech, Raycon are currently holding an anniversary sale to thank everyone who's shown their support with 20% off everything site-wide, with select products getting a whopping 40% off. For you and your loved ones, I highly recommend their iconic everyday earbuds because I've been using them for a good number of years now and they've become an essential part to my daily life. From traveling to work, doing the weekly shop, enjoying peaceful walks with my dog, keeping me distracted at the gym, and most of all, relaxing after a gruelingly stressful day. Everyday earbuds have a 32-hour battery life and perfect in-ear fit for all-day wear and lasting comfort, which was certainly put to the test last week playing a shameful number of hours of Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, but what better way to experience the sexy, soothing tones of Keanu Reeves and Idris Elba than with these bad boys? With 3 distinct sound profiles, noise isolation and awareness mode, and seamless tap functionality to flow between music, calls, and voice assistants, if you need a second opinion, just check out the 78,000 5-star reviews. You can support my channel today and celebrate Raycon turning 6 with their biggest seal of the year by hurrying over to buyraycon.com/Ryan and using the code BIRTHDAY to get 20 to 40% off site-wide. Now, before we get into the plot itself, I looked into this and came across 2 blog posts from 2016 detailing the legend of Peeping Tom that's practically explained word for word in the film using these sources. I was genuinely surprised it was a real obscure urban legend local to Maryland where the film was made, and appreciated Myers for solidifying a true sense of authenticity by using an actual real-world myth. Well, at least until I found out I was fucking bamboozled when Myers revealed in a 2018 interview with filmforums.com that Peeping Tom was a total fabrication. I can only think of the Blair Witch Project, Cannibal Holocaust, and the McPherson tapes as the only found footage films to be taken as genuine real footage when they came out, as everything post Blair Witch was easily debunked when audiences wised up to found footage as an official genre. Myers himself even called attention to how difficult it was to trick audiences following the Blair Witch's cultural zeitgeist, hence it's a huge factor to the film's examination of whether or not Sophia's footage is in fact genuine. Yet Myers succeeded where few have, largely in part to producing the myth himself and gaining traction on sites like Reddit and Creepypasta, and I can only assume the two posts I just read were made by yours truly, but I cannot verify that. Nonetheless, it proved Myers had an extraordinary understanding of the genre and the culture built around it, especially since he himself was a fan of zoology and cryptid-style stories, even casting real-world folklore author Matt Lake to play himself to explain the lore behind Peeping Tom. The story goes that Tom was described by a 16th century alchemist as a Flimmergeist, or German for Flickergeist, a type of shadowy poltergeist that haunted the edges of your peripheral vision where, if you blink, you'd miss him. When Tom eventually got close enough, and I mean literally in your face, he would use his long eyelashes to make you flutter and blink, and that's when he got you, with butterfly kisses. Now, I know what you're thinking, Ryan, it's impossible not to blink for an hour straight, so how can anyone actually summon him? Well, this is where things take an interesting turn early on. Sophia essentially finds a loophole by suggesting that Feldman's camera lens technically acts as an eye, so after pointing the camera down the tunnel past midnight, they discover during the editing process that Peeping Tom emerged in the frame. Far-fetched and hokey, I hear you say? Of course it is. One of many critics within the film quickly points out how it's too elaborately metaphorical for the camera to become a vessel for the human eye, even more so when the blink is defined as each time the camera stops and starts recording. It gets even more ridiculous, albeit very inventive later on, when Gavin takes the tapes to a post-production company who discover a strange audio that when put through a Morse code translator says blink. Gavin is very quick to be both mocked and commended for his creativity when he's accused of inventing the footage himself, but he's adamant it's real despite finding no evidence that Sophia or Feldman ever existed. From here, the film becomes a back and forth between Sophia and Feldman's discoveries about Peeping Tom, and Gavin trying to convince the world it's real footage, despite the various coincidences and contradictions, with the final nail in the coffin being his filmmaking hero Eduardo Sanchez, the co-creator of the Blair Witch Project, telling him to drop the act and admit the whole thing is a desperate bid for self-promotion to make his way to Hollywood. But on top of that, the additional crux to Gavin's story is that he is equally his own worst enemy. He's arrogant, egotistical, has slight delusions of grandeur, and is extremely confrontational with those who disagree with him. He gradually alienates himself from everyone, including his wife and son and the documentary crew he hired to film his journey in the first place. But the thing is, you kinda get why he's like that. He's desperate for his big break after years of failure, and gets shot down at every possible turn as he invests what little money he has into fueling an ambition that's nothing more than a vanity project. Yes, he sort of wants to uncover the truth behind the tape, sure, but his intentions are always in the wrong place. He's focused almost primarily on publicity, and turning what he believes to be a true, tragic, harrowing story into a sensational theatrical film. It becomes less about the truth and more so capitalizing on the zeitgeist this type of media attracts. As such, it's a timely subject matter in an age of Netflix glorified true crime documentaries that attempt to balance a moral line between authenticity and entertainment value. I don't blame filmmakers like Gavin for doing that. That's just how the industry has always worked. It has to be compelling, it has to energize audiences emotionally. We can't just pretend to have absolute unflinching moral integrity when we make these things because, let's face it, people need to put food on the table. You can believe in the cause, sure, but we don't post to social media or make content like this without fueling our egos in some capacity. There's a level of compromise that is always inherent to dealing with true stories for profit. If it was truly all about absolute authenticity, we would be posting this stuff without ads, merch plugs, and sponsors, but that's not going to pay the bills. There's a raw honesty to how Myers handles both Gavin and his own character. Both of them have the same goal, which is to make what they're doing financially viable, even if it involves taking advantage of tragedies and vulnerable people. If Gavin sincerely clearly wants the truth over anything else, as Myers asks him why not just release the footage to the world, because Gavin knows doing so won't gain him anything. It expands on this further as Gavin's obsession and desperation worsens into potentially dangerous territory, as Myers' character questions if he has a responsibility to step in and help, or maintain impartiality for the sake of untampered authenticity. I've read and lectured on documentary film and ethics numerous times, and a common debate is this conflict of interest of imposing auteur theory into the subject matter. Basically, in an age of competitive commercialism encouraging or rather forcing sensationalism, filmmakers injecting too much of their opinionated self into the hunt for the truth, as they say, highlights how aggressively manipulative and misappropriated the presentation of fact can become. The truth is, commercial and mainstream audiences don't want cold, boring facts. They want some flair to proceedings, something to get under their skin, excite them, provoke them, compel them to keep watching. However, if you take a filmmaker with a hardline bias, inherently the documentary will have issues with validity when facts and information are molded in favor of the storyteller to support their beliefs and values. Gavin is directly called out by critics and the documentary team for cutting out two significant revelations from the tapes, one where Feldman suggests they use visual effects to get the shot they need to make a successful film, and the other where Sophia admits to using an actor to impersonate the relative of a deceased to get a shot for her previous documentary that went on to win awards. Gavin is accused of manipulating the narrative to frame Sophia and Feldman as innocent, upstanding victims so people don't question the legitimacy of their footage. The reality is, like Gavin, they technically are under just as much pressure to possibly embellish the truth to make their documentary work. There are simply too many coincidences, like the film just so happens to fall into the hands of another filmmaker, to obvious camera trickery like making him disappear when briefly off screen, to masking him with foreground movement, and you know what, the only commentator missing during the debunking interviews to make it perfect is Captain Disillusion. In fact, someone even comments the same point I made in my video on Escape from Tomorrow, where student films always seem to use black and white as a cheap trick to hide bad cinematography and dodgy looking visual effects. If you're the nitpicking type, you will absolutely love how much they scrutinize every aspect of the footage and Gavin's intentions, to the point the mockumentary just becomes an outright documentary, as Myers interviews real people, including a psychologist, who summarizes Gavin as someone who at the very least subconsciously cherry-picks things to support his argument, and is growing desperate the more isolated he becomes. Eventually, after a painfully heartbreaking on-air humiliation where everyone accuses Gavin of making the footage himself and labeling him as an utter fraud, he returns home to find his wife has left him after he spent their son's education fund to pay the post-production company to clean up the footage, who themselves question why he would do such a thing if he's trying to be as authentic as possible, and soon after he cuts all communication with the documentary crew. During this, we learn Feldman became obsessed with getting Peeping Tom off his camera and was later killed while attempting to do so, his body discovered mangled akin to how someone dies in the ring. After several days, the documentary crew receive a random text from a disheveled Gavin, telling them to meet him at the tunnel at midnight, where they discover him attempting to recreate Sophia and Feldman's summoning, before wandering into the tunnel alone and vanishing. With confusion and uncertainty, the crew continue to look for their ending, before receiving a package regarding Sophia along with a key to a motel Gavin is staying. They arrive at his motel to find several cameras with their tapes missing, and upon entering the bathroom, they find Gavin's petrified corpse, the coroner later determining his cause of death to be heart failure. Embracing the hypocrisy shown by Gavin, Sophia, and Feldman, Myers and his crew decide to withhold their footage from the police to prevent Sophia's tapes from being confiscated, echoing their desire to finish the film, even if it costs them their morality. The documentary never proves the existence of Peeping Tom because, as Myers states in an interview with Dead Central, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that evidence is elusive. There is no physical evidence to definitively prove anything despite the bizarre circumstances. It plays into Myers' intention to make Peeping Tom a McGuffin to drive a story that's ultimately about how the obsessive pursuit can cause an individual to fall apart. To paraphrase him further, Gavin obsesses with the desire to be an independent artist, but in the end, it ultimately destroys him. I suppose I can relate to that sentiment as a YouTuber who obsesses over a video performance that's fundamentally outside my control by the algorithmic powers of the unknown, and the frustration it carries into my personal life. It's already too late when several of Gavin's critics come forth noticing anomalies they didn't see before, such as footage of Peeping Tom showing his POV of the camera that summoned him on that fateful night, and the strange Morse code audio showing a silhouette of Tom when put through an audio visualizer, which was apparently real thanks to their sound designer Matt Davies. It fittingly and impactfully concludes with Sophia's opening words revealing she was possessed into staring down the tunnel and summoning Peeping Tom, who now stands before her very eyes, but to avoid blinking, she takes the award that symbolises her filmmaking aspirations, destroys it, and cuts out her eyelids, so she never blinks again. A surveillance tape during the credits shows she is now institutionalized, forever staring back at Tom, trapping him alongside her endless pain and torment until the day she finally dies. Thank you so much for watching. Before we end, I want to try a new segment at the end of every video moving forward, and that is give you a clue as to what the next video is going to be, and I want you to let me know your guesses in the comments below. So for the next one, what if we uncovered footage that revealed a certain gothic monster-making mad scientist was at one time potentially a bit of a Nazi? So let me know your guesses in the comments below, and until next time, stay safe, stay away from staring contests, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.